Hello, my name is Johanna and I'm going to tell you about the British Empire. Now, when you learn about the British Empire, you always have to start at one place, and that is Britain. So we're going to start at the middle of my board, which tells you a few key facts about the British Empire. First, we need to have important people during the British Empire. You can have Queen Victoria. She was and still is the longest ruling monarch of England. Next, we have George Mueller. He is called the father of homeless waifs. I think that's partially because he opened an orphanage. Third, we have Florence Nightingale. For those of you who are nurses or who want to be nurses, you will probably like her because she created the modern nursing profession. Next, we have William Booth. He was the founder of the Salvation Army. And don't go thinking about the store, the actual ministry. Important dates during the Victorian Age would be 1800, where the Act of Union joins England and Ireland. See, Ireland was an Irish Catholic nation and England was a Protestant nation, and they are so close to each other that sometimes they have clashes with each other. And so this act kind of is a peace treaty, kind of. In 1858, the India Act gives India to the British government. Now, India already belonged to Britain by that time, but this just made this thing whole official and crystal clear for everyone. 1899 was the Boer War. So, this is South Africa here at the tip of Africa, and many Dutch people went there and settled colonies and started farming there, and they called themselves the Boer people. And then when England claimed that part, they had a few fights and stuff, and this was one of the most important, actually. A highlight of the Victorian age was in 1901, Queen Victoria dies. It was a very sad time, but it also meant that the Victorian age came to an end. Now we're going to move to the right side of my board, where we're going to learn about Africa during the British Empire. Important people in Africa during the British Empire would be David Livingstone. He was a missionary, and Robert Moffat. He was also a missionary. Then you have Samuel Adjai Crowther. That name is really difficult, but technically he was the first black bishop of the Church of England, which is a great achievement. Important dates in Africa would be 1855, where Livingstone becomes the first white person to see Victoria Falls, and he names it after Queen Victoria. Something interesting is that Victoria Lake is actually one of the main water sources for the Nile River, which is the longest river in the whole world. So that's really cool, so you can keep that in your brain till you need it as an interesting fact. Next, 1500 is the Portuguese slave trade. The Arabs had already taken a lot of Africans to be their trade, so that was usual. But then Portuguese started doing it because they discovered the Americas, and so more people needed slaves for their plantations. And at first they used the Native Americans who were already living on the land, but slowly the Native Americans began dying because of all the diseases that the people brought in, so they brought the Africans, and that's also why we have African American here in the United States. Then in 1873, sad thing is David Livingstone dies, which was kind of sad. And something interesting is that they buried his heart in Africa, and then they sent his body to England. So that's just really cool fact. Now we go to the left side of my board. Important people of the exploration time during the British Empire would be Captain James Cook, who discovered Australia and New Zealand. And I know that we're all a little bit like, what? Australia and New Zealand have always been there. Yes. And that's what brings us to the Aborigines, Native Australians. So, first, it was already a country and had the natives and stuff. Then Captain James Cook found it for the rest of the world. And that's really interesting. Another interesting fact about Australia was that when the explorers were first exploring it, the Aborigines, every time a kangaroo began hopping by, they would say kangaroo or something like that. And the people the explorers thought that's the name of the animal, and that's why we call it kangaroo to this day. Next, we have the Maori, which are native New Zealanders. And natives. I just really like learning about natives of other countries because it's like a difference, compare and contrast between the natives and the people who came later. Important dates: circa 1770s, Cook discovers Australia and New Zealand. We already talked about that, so we can rush through that. And then 1867, England makes Canada a self-governing commonwealth. Something really interesting about that, which I think happened because of the American Revolution, was that England actually waited until they thought Canada was ready to be a self-governing commonwealth, and then they gave Canada their independence so that there wouldn't be any wars and a very sad history. Highlights: 1867, Canada becomes a self-governing commonwealth. And here's a picture of Captain James Cook. And we owe a lot of our countries today to him. Or that we know, countries that we know. And thank you for listening to my project, and I hope you learned a lot about the British Empire and the Victorian Age.